Welcome back to Bound in Fear. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe for more true horror ranger confessions. These aren't just stories. They're incidents, reports, things that never make it into the news, but stay with the people who witness them. Tonight, I'll take you into a different park, a place where I was stationed years ago. And I'll tell you what happened when I learned that not all forests let you leave the way you came. I had been transferred from my usual posting to a remote national park in the Pacific Northwest. The kind of place that feels endless towering firs, mist that hangs low in the mornings, and trails so rarely traveled you start to believe you're the only human who's ever set foot there. My assignment was simple: routine patrols, monitoring wildlife, and assisting visitors when needed. On paper, it looked like a quiet post. In reality, it turned into the most unsettling chapter of my career. My first week went smoothly. I spent most of my days walking long stretches of trail, checking signage, clearing debris, and familiarizing myself with the area. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Birds went silent at odd times. The air felt charged, heavy. Every so often, I'd get the sense that I wasn't alone, though the trail behind me was always empty. I chalked it up to nerves, adjusting to a new post. But soon, the incident started. It began with reports of campers hearing strange noises at night. Not the usual owls or coyotes, but whispers low, close to their tents, though no one was there. One family swore they heard footsteps circling their site, heavy and deliberate. Yet, when they looked outside with flashlights, the ground was undisturbed. Another hiker claimed to have followed a voice calling his name deep into the woods, only to realize he'd wandered several miles off trail without remembering how at first. I treated these as stories fueled by exhaustion, paranoia, or too much imagination. But then I experienced it myself. One night I was patrolling a ridge trail when my radio crackled. A voice came through soft, distorted, but it wasn't dispatch. It said my name, clear as day. Just my name, spoken slowly. I froze, checked my surroundings, and radioed back, but dispatch hadn't sent anything. The channel was silent. I told myself it was interference, but my gut knew better. The following week, I was called to assist in a search for a missing backpacker. A man in his early 30s, familiar with the area, who had set out on a solo trip and failed to return. Search efforts began immediately. We combed miles of trail, checked ridges, streams, and even brought in dogs. But the deeper we went into the forest, the stranger things became. Compasses spun erratically. GPS units dropped out. Even the dogs seemed disoriented, pulling in circles or refusing to move forward. On the second day, I stumbled across something I'll never forget. In a clearing, I found the backpacker's campsite. His tent was pitched, his gear laid out neatly, food untouched. But there was no sign of him. What unsettled me most were the markings on the ground around the tent. Dozens of small circles etched into the dirt, arranged in a spiral leading toward the tree line. They weren't animal prints. They weren't random. It looked deliberate, ritualistic almost. That night, while resting back at base, I dreamt of the clearing. Only this time, the spiral didn't stop at the tree line. It kept going, and in the dream, I followed it. I woke drenched in sweat, heart racing, with the sound of whispers still echoing in my ears. On the third day of the search, We found the backpacker, or what was left of him. He was standing in the middle of a shallow stream, chest deep in water, motionless. At first I thought he was alive, just in shock. But when we got closer, it became clear. His eyes were open, fixed on the tree line, and his mouth was slightly parted, as if he had been speaking when he froze. His body was pale, drained of warmth, but there were no wounds, no injuries, no sign of how he had died. The coroner later ruled it exposure and drowning, but I was there. I saw him, and I knew he hadn't drowned. His face was twisted in something beyond fear and expression of someone who had seen something no human should. After that case, things escalated. More visitors reported voices calling them by name. Rangers began to experience strange lapses in time. I myself once walked a trail that should have taken an hour, only to find 4 hours had passed when I checked my watch. Another ranger refused to go back out after claiming he saw a tall figure watching from the tree line, unmoving, featureless, but present. The park itself seemed to bend reality. Landmarks shifted. Trails doubled back in ways they shouldn't, even in broad daylight. The forest had a darkness to it, an oppressive presence that never left. I started carrying extra gear compasses, radios, even chalk to mark trees, but nothing helped. Sometimes the marks I left would vanish, as if the forest erased them. The final straw came one autumn evening. I was patrolling alone when I heard it again, my name, whispered from the trees. I froze, flashlight scanning the woods, but there was no one. Then, just ahead, I saw a figure, tall, pale, standing between 2 firs. At first, I thought it was a lost hiker. I called out, but it didn't move, didn't respond, just watched. When I took a step forward, it stepped back without sound, without disturbing a single leaf, and then it was gone. I stood there, heart pounding, knowing that if I followed, I might never return. I turned back that night, and I've never set foot in that sector again. Years later, I still think about that park. The missing backpacker, the whispers, the figure. I've worked in several parks since, each with their own dangers, wildlife, terrain, weather, but nothing compares to that place. I don't know what lives in those woods. I don't know what it wants, but I know it watches, it waits, and it chooses. And if you ever find yourself on those trails, hearing your name whispered through the trees, don't answer. Through the trees, don't answer. Story 2, * tonight's story, is one of the darkest I've ever told. I was stationed years ago in a park out west, not far from the desert. It wasn't like the thick, endless forests of the Pacific Northwest. This place had vast stretches of red stone, slot canyons that swallowed the light, and mesas that cast long shadows at dusk. On paper, it looked like a peaceful post. Fewer visitors compared to other parks, quiet nights, and endless skies. But the longer I worked there, the more I realized that silence can be more unsettling than any predator. The first time I noticed something off was during a night patrol near one of the canyon trails. I'd stopped at a ridge to take in the view when I heard rocks shifting below me. At first, I thought it was a mountain lion or maybe a stray hiker trying to climb up. I called down, shining my flashlight, but the beam revealed nothing, just the canyon wall. Then came the sound again, rocks scraping, falling, like something climbing steadily upward. Yet there was nothing in the light. Just the sound of ascent, getting closer. When I finally backed away, the noise stopped. The silence after was worse, heavy, absolute. I left quickly, but I didn't forget. The following month, a group of tourists went missing near that same ridge. They were experienced hikers, had checked in at the visitor center, carried maps and supplies. Their car was found parked neatly at the trailhead, doors locked, gear inside. But they never came back. We searched for days, dropping into canyons, scaling ridges, using helicopters to scan the area. Nothing, no tracks, no evidence, just gone. That case sat with me. Too clean, too sudden. People don't just vanish in the desert. Even if they fall or get lost, there's always something left behind. But this was different. Weeks later, while patrolling another sector, I met an old man. He wasn't a camper, not on any permit list. He was sitting by a dry creek bed, staring at the rocks. I asked if he needed help, but he just smiled faintly and said, "You should be careful where the earth opens its mouth." I thought he was just eccentric, maybe a drifter, but his words clung to me. When I looked back, seconds later, he was gone. No prints. No sign he'd ever been there. Soon after, reports began trickling in. Campers hearing voices echoing through the canyons at night. Hikers feeling followed on empty trails. Some claimed to see figures at the top of ridges, too tall, standing unnaturally still, always watching. By the time rangers arrived, there was never anyone there. The worst was a case that happened in my second year. A young couple had set up camp near one of the lesser-known slot canyons. They never returned. Their tent was found days later, still pitched, sleeping bags neatly inside, food untouched. But there was a strange detail that none of us could shake. Their boots were placed just outside the tent entrance, perfectly aligned, as if they'd stepped out in the night and never come back. Search teams combed the canyon. Nothing. The dogs refused to go in, whimpering at the entrance. And those of us who did step inside noticed something eerie. The walls seemed to breathe. The canyon air pulsed in faint gusts, like the place itself was alive. Our voices echoed strangely, repeating words we hadn't spoken. At one point, I thought I heard my own voice calling me deeper, though my mouth hadn't moved. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of those boots, neatly waiting outside the tent, as if their owners had been invited somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't on any map. Months passed, but the disappearances continued. A solo hiker here, a photographer there, always near canyons, always without a trace. Some locals whispered old legends, stories about the earth swallowing people whole, about spirits that lived in the stone. I wanted to dismiss them. I was trained to, but each time I walked those trails, I felt it. The weight, the watching, the sense that something vast and ancient lived under those rocks, patient and hungry. My breaking point came one evening at sunset. I was patrolling near the trailhead of a narrow gorge when I heard someone call my name, clear, sharp, echoing off the stone. I froze. It wasn't coming from my radio, and it wasn't a voice I recognized. It was deeper, slower, almost mocking. I called out, shining my light, but the gorge swallowed the beam. Then, from deep inside, I heard it again. My name, drawn out, like something was waiting for me to follow. I took one step toward the gorge and the ground beneath me shifted, just slightly, enough to make rocks tumble into the darkness below. I scrambled back, heart racing, certain that if I had gone further, I wouldn't have come out again. The whisper of my name faded, replaced by silence. I left that night, filed my report, but I never went near that gorge again. Over the years, I've heard other rangers talk quietly, late at night, when no one else is around, about voices in the stone, about shadows at the ridgeline, about disappearances that never made it to official logs. We don't write them down. We don't talk about them outside, but we all know the desert keeps its secrets, and some canyons are hungrier than others. So if you ever camp out west, near those red rocks and narrow slots, if you hear someone call your name after dark, don't answer, don't follow, don't even look, because not everyone who walks into the canyon comes back out. Story 3. The snow was different out there. Not the soft, powdery snow people imagine when they think of holidays, but a heavy, smothering kind that clung to everything and swallowed sound whole. I had been transferred to the northern section of the park that winter, a stretch of land most people never saw. Miles of frozen pines, ridges of ice, and valleys where the wind cut so sharp it felt like razors on your skin. It wasn't the kind of place visitors flocked to, especially in the off-season. That should have made my job easier. But the fewer people who came, the more I noticed things that didn't make sense. And some nights, when the cold crept deep into my bones, I almost wished for crowds, because the silence there was worse than any chaos. The first strange thing happened a few weeks into my post. A hiker's tracks were found cutting across the snow toward the tree line about 3 miles from one of the cabins. Clear boot prints, steady and even. But they just stopped. No sign of stumbling. No broken branches. No body. Just an abrupt end in the middle of the white field, as though the man had stepped off into the air. Search teams combed the area, dogs sniffing, helicopters scanning. Nothing. His backpack was later found buried under fresh snow, neatly zipped, untouched, sitting upright against a tree like he had set it down carefully before vanishing. I told myself the storm must have covered more tracks, but in my gut, I knew snow doesn't bury only half a trail. Nights were the worst. In the cold, sound travels strangely. Sometimes, sitting in the ranger station, I swore I could hear voices carried on the wind thin, stretched out like someone calling from far away. One night, while patrolling a remote trail, I stopped dead when I heard my radio crackle. Static, then a voice. My own voice. It said my name in a flat, tired tone, repeating it twice before cutting out. I checked with the others. None of them had called. The channel was clear, but the sound of my name stuck with me all night, echoing under my skin. There was an old ranger, Tom, who had been stationed there before me. He warned me not to ignore the little things. He said the snow holds more than cold, it holds memory. He told me about nights when he'd seen figures standing at the tree line, too far to make out details, just tall silhouettes against the white. They never moved, never came closer, but when he blinked, they'd be gone. He laughed it off as tricks of the light, but I saw the way his eyes tightened, how he spoke softer when he said it. A man doesn't describe something like that unless he knows it's real. One evening, I was called to check on a campsite a few miles out. A family had reserved one of the winter cabins, but hadn't checked in. Their car was still parked at the trailhead, covered in frost, doors locked. I hiked up, snow crunching under my boots, until I found the cabin. The lights were off, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the fireplace was cold, their belongings scattered neatly, sleeping bags unrolled, food on the counter, a kettle by the stove. But the family wasn't there, not a trace of struggle, just absence, thick and heavy. On the table was a half-finished puzzle, pieces arranged carefully. I stared at it too long before realizing the pieces formed the shape of an eye. I don't know if they had meant it that way, but the realization sent a sharp chill through me that had nothing to do with the snow. That night, the storm came in hard. I barely made it back to my truck through the wind and whiteout. I tried to radio in, but only static answered. And beneath the static, faintly, I thought I heard children laughing. I turned the volume down and didn't touch the radio again until morning. The family was never found. The report was filed quietly, brushed aside like so many others. But I knew the truth: we hadn't lost them to the storm. Something had taken them. In the weeks after, I began to dread patrols after dusk. I'd walk the trails, snow creaking under my boots, and feel the weight of the trees watching me. Sometimes I'd hear crunching footsteps behind me, perfectly in time with mine, but when I turned, there was only snow and silence. Other times, I'd find strange shapes pressed into the drift's handprints, long and thin, as if someone had dragged icy fingers across the surface. Once, near a frozen lake, I found a perfect circle carved into the snow, wide and deep, with no tracks leading in or out. Just a hollow imprint, like something massive had rested there briefly before moving on. I stopped telling the others. The more I spoke about it, the more I saw the same unease in their eyes. We all knew, but no one wanted to say it out loud. A silence packed. Because if you named it, it became real. And in that endless cold, reality was dangerous enough already. One morning, I woke to find my own boots by the door of my cabin, perfectly aligned, laces untied. I hadn't left them that way. I know I hadn't. I checked the lock, the windows, everything was still shut tight. But there they were, as though someone had carefully removed them from my feet while I slept and placed them like a ritual offering. I didn't sleep at all the next night, sitting up with my flashlight and rifle across my lap, but nothing came. Just the sound of the wind scraping against the cabin walls. The final straw came late one night on patrol. I was moving through a narrow pass when my flashlight caught something ahead. A figure. At first, I thought it was a lost hiker, thin frame, standing still in the snow. I called out, my voice echoing against the rock. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. Just stood there, head tilted slightly. I felt my throat go dry. I raised my light higher. The face was wrong. Too pale, too long. The features stretched thin, as if pressed into the shape of a human, but not quite right. Its eyes reflected the beam like ice, and though its mouth never moved, I heard my name whispered all around me, from the rocks, from the snow, from inside my skull. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. The light flickered on. In that blink, it was gone. The snow where it had stood was smooth, untouched. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the truck, breath ragged, hands shaking too hard to grip the wheel. I told no one. I couldn't. How do you explain that to people who are already trying to pretend the wilderness is safe? I finished out the season, but I left as soon as spring came. I never went back to that park. But sometimes, in winter, when the wind howls just right outside my window, I swear I still hear it. My name whispered through the static of the cold. A reminder, a promise, that some things don't stay buried in the snow. And if you ever find yourself hiking out there, in that endless white, and you hear footsteps behind you, or your name carried on the wind, don't turn around, don't answer, don't look, because the snow remembers, and it never lets go, and it never lets go. Story 4. People vanish in the forests of this park. It's the kind of thing nobody really talks about outside the ranger station, and if they do, it's whispered. You hear about lost hikers or campers who didn't pay attention, who strayed from the trail or made a wrong turn. Those disappearances make sense. You can chalk them up to poor judgment, fatigue, or bad luck. But then there are the others, the ones that defy every explanation, the ones that vanish as if the forest itself claimed them. I've been a park ranger for 15 years, and I've seen enough to know when something in the woods isn't right. You develop a sixth sense after a while. You know when a trail isn't just empty. You can feel it in your chest, that creeping weight, the hairs on the back of your neck standing at attention. It's the kind of feeling that makes you check your watch twice and wonder if the sun is moving slower than it should. The first incident I ever encountered that shook me didn't happen to me directly. I was on a shift in the northern section, near the old logging roads that aren't used anymore. One of the volunteers came running into the station, pale as death, screaming about a hiker who had vanished right in front of him. The man had been experienced mid-30s, backpacking for years, knew the trails well, and had never gotten lost before. He had been walking behind the volunteer on a narrow ridge when he simply disappeared. No scream, no stumble, no sound at all. 1 second he was there, the next gone. His pack was still on the trail, lying there as though he had just dropped it for a moment. We searched for days, combing the woods, calling, shining every flashlight and headlamp into the dark undergrowth, and we found nothing. Not even footprints leading away from the trail. It was like he had been erased from the world. I remember the feeling I had while walking that trail myself a few days later. It was late afternoon, the light slanting through the pines, long shadows stretching across the forest floor. I could feel eyes on me, though I didn't see anyone. The forest itself seemed heavier, darker, almost alive in a way that didn't feel natural. Every snap of a twig made me spin around. Every rustle in the brush felt deliberate. You learn quickly here that the mind plays tricks. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the tricks are real. There was a clearing I came across during that search, a small break in the trees where the sunlight hit the moss in golden shafts. At first it looked like any other clearing, but then I noticed the ground. It was different. The moss was flattened in patches, like someone or something had lain there for hours, and in the center was a circular depression in the earth. You could see the outline of it, even with the forest reclaiming it. I don't know why, but I knelt down to touch it. The moment my fingers brushed the earth, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I stood up immediately, and that's when I heard it, a faint whisper, carried by the wind, but not the normal wind rustle. It was soft, almost syllables forming words, but they didn't make sense. I froze, straining to listen. The whisper stopped. The silence that followed was so loud it made my ears ring. I've never returned to that clearing since. The next case came a few years later. A family of 3 parents and a young boy, maybe 9 or 10, came camping in one of the more remote sectors. They were cautious, seasoned campers, knew the forest well, and had planned carefully. The first night went fine. They cooked over a small fire, laughed, and told stories. The boy went to bed early. Around midnight, the mother woke to check on him. He was gone. The tent flap was open, swinging lightly in the breeze, but there was no sound, no footprints in the nearby dirt. Just gone. She screamed for her husband. They searched frantically, calling his name. Nothing. I was dispatched at first light. The wheelchair they had for him, he had a condition that made walking difficult, was found near the tent. It hadn't moved an inch, but the boy himself had vanished. We searched for hours. There were no tracks leading away, no sign of an animal attack, nothing at all. Then, hours later, a hiker from the opposite side of the park stumbled upon the boy. He was sitting cross-legged on a large rock halfway up a ridge that should have taken him hours to climb, even walking. He was unharmed, calm, almost unnaturally so, staring into the forest below as if waiting. That was when I noticed a large, black dog sitting beside him. Its fur was matted with dirt, but its eyes were intelligent, almost human in their focus. It didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't move when we approached. It just sat there. When the boy's father stepped forward to grab him, the dog gave a single bark and vanished into the trees without a trace. We never found it again. The boy couldn't explain how he got there. He only remembered sleeping in the tent and waking on the ridge with the dog beside him. Over the years, more people disappeared in similar ways. Hikers familiar with the forest, seasoned campers, volunteers like myself, and tourists alike. They would step off the trail for a moment, take a wrong turn, or simply pause to tie a bootlace, and they would vanish. Sometimes we found traces, backpacks, shoes, pieces of clothing, but the people themselves were gone, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. And those we did find, well, they weren't the same. They were distant, hollow-eyed, muttering about things they couldn't explain, about shadows that moved of their own accord, about eyes in the dark watching, following. Some of them refused to ever set foot in the park again. Others couldn't. They had to. They were drawn back as if the forest called them. One particular case haunts me still. It involved a group of college students, 4 of them, who came for a weekend camping trip. Experienced hikers, they were confident in their abilities and knowledge of the forest. They set up camp in a remote area near the northern ridge. The first day went smoothly, nothing out of the ordinary. By nightfall, the air changed. The sounds of the forest shifted, subtle at first. Birds were silent, and the wind itself seemed to whisper in patterns almost like speech. They reported hearing faint voices calling their names. Not human voices, at least not ones they could recognize. Just whispers from all directions. The second night, one of them vanished. Just like that. Sleeping bag empty, pack intact, nothing else disturbed. The remaining 3 searched desperately, but the forest yielded nothing. Then the second disappeared. One of the remaining students swore he saw it happen. A flicker in the darkness, a movement, and his friend was gone. The third vanished the next day, right in front of his eyes. He ran for miles, never stopping, never looking back. When he stumbled into the ranger station, shaking, dirt-streaked, eyes wide with terror, he could only whisper one thing: it took them. We never found the others. Not a trace, nothing to explain what had happened. That camp remains untouched, tents still pitched, fire pit cold, as though the students had simply stepped away. There are areas in the forest we avoid now. Trails that used to be accessible are closed off, signs warning people not to venture there. But some still do. People curious, reckless, or just desperate to explore the unknown. And some of them vanish. The dead zone, we call it, among the ranges. An area where GPS fails, compasses spin wildly, and time seems to lose all meaning. People enter, expecting to spend an hour, only to emerge hours or days later, if they emerge at all. Others never return. Their belongings, if anything, is found scattered or untouched, as though the forest itself placed them there. Late at night, when I patrol alone, I feel it. The eyes on the trail, the subtle shift in the air. Sometimes I hear the whispers, faint voices just beyond comprehension. It's not imagination. I know the difference now. It's the forest. It watches, it waits, and it chooses. There's no pattern to it that we can discern. Experienced hikers, children, families, volunteers, seasoned rangers, we're all equally vulnerable. I remember a case with a retired couple who had been visiting for decades. They knew the forest like the back of their hands. They were careful, always staying on marked trails, always checking in. One afternoon, they wandered into a grove of old pines, the light barely reaching the moss-covered floor. They didn't stray far, maybe a few 100 feet off the trail. Hours later, when friends went looking, they were gone. No footprints, no disturbances, just absence. The couple's car was found in the parking area, keys inside, belongings untouched. We combed the forest for days. Nothing, just empty forest, indifferent and silent. Sometimes people return, but when they do, they're changed. Hollow eyes, distant voices, retelling fragments of what happened in disjointed pieces. Shadows in the corner of the forest, creatures glimpsed but never understood, sounds that have no source. Some speak of a presence that doesn't let go. Others speak of being taken to places outside the forest, spaces that feel familiar yet wrong, where trees are taller, shadows longer, and the air thick with something unnatural. I've never found these places. I've searched with every tool at my disposal: maps, drones, infrared cameras. Nothing. But the stories persist. The forest doesn't follow rules. Logic doesn't matter here. People can vanish without trace, appear hours or miles away, or return altered. Animals behave differently in these zones. Birds fly in tight circles, deer freeze mid-step, and even the wind seems to carry intent. We have protocols for missing persons, but none of them ever fully apply here. A person can walk a few feet off the trail and be gone, like they were never there. The trail and be gone, like they were never there. Story 5. I've been a park ranger for over 12 years now, and I've seen things out here that make you question reality, make you doubt your senses, make you wonder if the stories passed from ranger to ranger are just exaggerated campfire tales or warnings. But after a decade in these woods, I know there's truth in every whisper, in every unspoken fear. The first incident that really shook me involved a hiker, a young man in his late 20s. He was experienced, well prepared, the kind of person who double-checks his map, keeps extra supplies, always lets someone know his exact route. He was alone, exploring a section of the park that's rarely used. When he didn't check in after the allotted time, his friends reported him missing. I was assigned to the search party. We combed every inch of the marked trails, scanned the ridges with binoculars, even deployed a drone with thermal imaging. Nothing, no footprints, no disturbance of the underbrush, no trace of human presence beyond his dropped water bottle near a stream. It was like he had evaporated into thin air. The more I delved into these woods, the more I realized that certain areas were dangerous in ways we didn't understand. There are trails that seem normal, familiar, well-worn, but once you step off them, the rules of the forest change. Trees appear closer together, shadows stretch unnaturally, and the air itself seems heavier. Time behaves differently there. Minutes feel like hours. Hours collapse into seconds. It's subtle at first, almost imperceptible, until you realize you've walked in circles, that you've retraced your steps without noticing. Those who wander into these zones sometimes return hours later, claiming they were only gone for minutes. Others never return at all. There was one case that remains with me vividly. A group of 4 college students set up camp near an abandoned logging area. They had been hiking for 2 days, enjoying the isolation, the quiet. On the first night, they reported nothing unusual. The stars were bright, the fire crackled normally, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. But around midnight, one of the students vanished. No scream, no movement, just gone. The tent flap was open, as if someone had walked out. The rest of the group searched frantically, calling his name. Nothing. No footprints leading into the woods. No sign of struggle. Nothing. They even checked the surrounding rivers, rocks, and cliffs. Nothing by dawn. They were terrified, realizing that this forest was not the familiar, safe place they had imagined. On the second night, the second student vanished. The remaining 2 described hearing something low, guttural whispers that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. The whispers called their names, mimicking the tone of their friends' voices. When the 3rd student vanished, the following morning, the last one fled, running blindly through the woods, stumbling over roots, branches, rocks. He didn't stop until he found the main trail and ran straight into the ranger station, exhausted, screaming. He kept repeating the same words. It watches. It waits. Don't follow. We launched a search, but the 3 missing students were never found. Their camp remained untouched, their belongings neatly arranged as if they had stepped away and simply vanished. It's not always young, inexperienced hikers. I've seen families vanish as well. A couple with a young daughter, seasoned campers, knowledgeable about the forest, disappeared near a creek that's usually teeming with wildlife. We found a car in the parking lot, packed and untouched, but no sign of the family. Search teams scoured the area for days, but nothing turned up. Weeks later, a lone hiker reported seeing a small girl, alone, sitting beside a moss-covered boulder, staring at the canopy. When approached, she simply turned and ran deeper into the woods, disappearing as if she had never been there. I've spent countless nights walking these trails alone, flashlight in hand, hearing things that shouldn't be there. Branches crack without wind, shadows move in unnatural patterns, and sometimes I hear voices, low, indecipherable, carried on the breeze but never quite forming words I can recognize. The forest itself seems alive, watching. Every ranger learns to respect it, to notice when something is off. The smell of damp moss, the way sunlight falls through the trees, the sudden hush in the sounds of birds and insects. You notice these things, and you learn quickly that the forest chooses its moments. Another incident involved a hiker who was an expert in survival. He had been exploring the park for years, knew it better than anyone, and had trained extensively for situations like this. He disappeared while hiking a trail that looped through the northern pines. His backpack was found leaning against a tree several miles from where he was last seen, fully intact with everything inside, as if he had just set it down. No footprints, no indications of a struggle. Weeks later, a deer hunter stumbled upon him standing in a clearing, muttering incoherently, staring at a point in the trees. He had scratches on his arms and dirt under his nails, but no explanation. When asked what happened, he could only whisper about eyes in the trees and something that doesn't breathe. He refused to hike again, leaving the park never to return. Sometimes, people return weeks later with no memory of what happened. A father and son disappeared during a short hike along a seldom used trail. They were reported missing after failing to return by evening. A search team combed the area for 3 days. On the 4th day, they were found sitting together beneath a giant oak, staring at the ground, silent, almost catatonic. They had no injuries, no signs of struggle, nothing to indicate what had happened. When questioned, they claimed they had walked somewhere else, but couldn't recall how they got there. Their clothing was clean, dry, and seemed almost new, despite the storm that had passed during their disappearance. One particularly eerie phenomenon reported by hikers involves what we call the silent grove. It's an area where even birds refuse to enter, where the wind seems to stop moving, and where sound is absorbed as though the forest itself swallows it. People report hearing nothing but their own heartbeat, sometimes their own voice echoing strangely. Entering the grove, hikers have said they feel as though they're being watched, even when alone. Some report seeing shadows that shouldn't exist, figures that flit between trees, always at the periphery of vision. Those who enter rarely return without distress, often refusing to ever speak of what they encountered. I've personally walked through the silent grove during the day. The light filters differently there, the air thick with a metallic scent, like iron mixed with damp earth. My footsteps sound muffled, too quiet, as if the ground itself absorbs them. And sometimes, when I pause, I hear whispers. Not human, not entirely, just a low hissing that forms words I can't understand. It seems to move around me, circling, pressing, until I start walking again just to escape it. Even now, I avoid that grove whenever possible. There are also the old structures in the park, remnants of logging camps long abandoned. Some are rotted, barely holding together. Others seem preserved unnaturally, with doors and windows intact, as though someone left in a hurry. Rangers have reported seeing shadows moving behind broken windows, hearing creaks from floorboards that shouldn't exist. Hikers have spoken of feeling compelled to enter, as if drawn by some force, only to leave disoriented, unsure of how they exited. A few have disappeared entirely, leaving behind packs, clothing, and supplies neatly stacked on floors or benches, untouched by time or decay. Then there's the case of the guardian animal. A hiker reported being stalked by a large black wolf with piercing amber eyes. It never attacked, but appeared whenever he veered off the trail, appearing at the edge of vision, disappearing when looked at directly. At one point, he lost his way for hours, only to find the wolf sitting calmly beside his backpack. He claimed the animal guided him back to safety, then vanished without trace. This pattern repeats with different species, sometimes dogs, sometimes deer, occasionally birds that seem intelligent, almost sentient. They appear, watch, and disappear, leaving those they encounter with a deep sense of unease. Not all disappearances are permanent, but those who return are never the same. Some lose track of time entirely, unsure if hours or days have passed. Others refuse to speak, muttering fragments about shadows, voices, and movements in the dark. A few have described being taken to places that shouldn't exist, clearings that are larger than the surrounding forest, trees taller than any species in the park, skies with unfamiliar stars. Some return with minor scratches or dirt, others completely unscathed. But all carry a memory that chills them to the bone, a memory that makes them avoid the forest forever. I've seen evidence of things that shouldn't exist. Twisted shapes in the moss, patterns in the trees that resemble eyes or faces, depressions in the ground that suggest someone or something was lying there. I've heard cries in the distance that sound human but impossible, like recordings played backward. Sometimes, when walking alone, I feel a presence pressing close just behind me, and when I turn, nothing is there. Only trees, only shadows, only the oppressive weight of something ancient and patient, waiting. I often wonder if those who disappear are chosen, if the forest itself selects its victims. Experienced hikers, families, children, volunteers, park rangers, were all equally vulnerable. It doesn't matter who you are or how prepared you think you are. The forest doesn't care. It watches, it waits, and when it decides, it acts, and when it decides, it acts. Story 6. You think you know the woods, that you understand the rhythm of nature, the quiet, the subtle sounds of life. But there are corners of these forests places deep enough, shadowed enough where the rules of reality bend, where logic and reason seem to get lost, along with anyone who ventures too far. I learned that the hard way, one night that I still replay in my mind almost every time I close my eyes. It was late fall, the kind of evening where the chill creeps into your bones even before the sun has fully disappeared. I had been posted at a remote section of the national park, miles from the nearest visitor center, where the trails thin out and the forest grows dense. The previous week, there had been reports from hikers about strange lights, tiny flickers through the trees that moved too fast, or too deliberately, to be fireflies or reflections. I didn't give it much thought at first. The forest has its tricks. Shadows can play games with your eyes. But something about the way the locals whispered about it didn't sit right with me that night. I was making my usual rounds, flashlight cutting through the thick underbrush, radio clipped to my chest in case I needed backup. The wind had a way of carrying sound oddly, rustling through the pines, whispering across the fallen leaves. It wasn't just cold. It felt expectant, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I remember feeling a prickle along my neck. That sensation you get when you know you're not alone, even though you see no one. I had been following a small logging trail that hadn't been used in years, a narrow path winding deeper into the woods. The map didn't mark anything unusual, but instinct told me to pay attention. Halfway through the trail, I noticed something strange. The trees on either side were unnaturally bare, as if the forest itself had recoiled from some presence. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe, and the usual chorus of nighttime insects fell silent. Even the distant call of an owl seemed muffled. It was like the forest had closed in around me. Then I heard a soft footstep, not a crunch of leaves, not the snap of a twig in the wind, but a deliberate, measured step. Someone or something was moving behind me. My first instinct was to call out, "Hello," but my voice caught in my throat. The sound didn't respond. It didn't echo. It wasn't human. I froze, every muscle tensed, and tried to listen. There it was again, closer this time. A deliberate, heavy step, but without the weight you'd expect. It was almost floating. I reached for my radio, intending to call the station, but the static came first. Not the usual white noise. A deep, low hum vibrating through the speaker. I lowered the radio and scanned the darkness. That's when I saw it, a figure between the trees, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. At first, I thought it was a lost hiker, maybe trying to scare me. But the shape didn't move naturally. Its limbs were elongated, its posture wrong. It didn't run or walk. It drifted. Its face, or what I thought might be a face, was pale, too pale, almost luminous in the dim light. And its eyes. I can't describe the eyes. Not human, not animal, just hollow. Black voids that seemed to reach into my mind. I froze, and that's when the forest seemed to exhale. The wind stopped. The air held still, oppressive and heavy, and I realized I couldn't hear my own heartbeat anymore. Every sound, every instinct told me to run, but my legs felt cemented. Then the figure moved closer, gliding between the trees, and I noticed something else. There were no footprints. The ground was soft from the autumn leaves, but nothing. It hadn't touched the earth. I forced myself to step backward, heart hammering in my chest. The radio crackled again, and this time a voice came through, but not human. It whispered my name. Just my name. Over and over, like it knew me, like it had been waiting for me. I staggered back, tripping over a root, and the figure paused, tilting its head as if amused. Then it started moving faster, a silent glide that defied all logic. I ran, I don't know how far. The forest twisted. Trails I had memorized seemed wrong, doubled back, or ended abruptly against trees that weren't there before. I realized I had no idea which way led back to my station. Hours or maybe minutes passed. Time didn't feel right. The deeper I ran, the thicker the darkness became, pressing in, almost alive. That's when I started seeing them. Fleeting shapes in the periphery, figures standing silently just beyond my vision. No features, no faces, just silhouettes. They didn't move toward me at first. They simply watched. But the presence was undeniable. I could feel their gaze in my bones. I stumbled into a clearing, and the thing from before was there, waiting. Not a step closer, but present, commanding. And the whispers returned, louder now. A cacophony of sounds that weren't words, but conveyed meaning all the same. Fear, hunger, expectation. I dropped to my knees, unable to move, and that's when I saw the ground around it. Marks, symbols carved into the earth, too precise, too deliberate, glowing faintly in the dark. They weren't language I recognized, not human at all, but they felt old, primal, dangerous. I remember crawling backward, inch by inch, trying not to provoke it. Then it did something impossible. It disappeared. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. But the forest didn't feel empty. I could hear the faint crunch of leaves, soft and deliberate, coming from all around me. The silhouettes appeared again at the edge of the clearing, circling silently, like predators assessing me. I realized I wasn't meant to leave, not yet. I wasn't supposed to survive this night. I don't remember screaming. I think I did at some point. But my voice seemed swallowed by the trees. My hands clawed at the dirt, my mind racing, trying to rationalize, to wake up from some terrible dream. Then, as suddenly as it began, the presence retreated. The figures melted into the shadows. The whispers stopped, and I found myself back on the main trail. The familiar landmarks of the park station just barely visible through the trees. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached a station, radio in hand, shouting into the mic, trying to summon backup, trying to make sense of what had just happened. No one believed me. How could they? I had no evidence, no footprints, no sign that anything abnormal had occurred. They told me it was exhaustion, paranoia, hallucination. Maybe it was. Maybe that's what I want to believe. But the memory, the smell of the air, the oppressive weight, the void eyes haunt me every night. I took a week off after that. I couldn't sleep. I would wake, drenched in sweat, heart hammering, the silhouettes standing over me. And then I received a call from a fellow ranger. Our hiker had gone missing in the same area. Reports, eerily similar, drifting shapes, whispers, a figure with hollow eyes. I was assigned to lead the search. I walked that same trail again, daylight filtering through the autumn canopy, and even then, the unease didn't fade. The forest seemed different, quieter, expectant. We searched for days, using dogs, helicopters, everything, nothing, no footprints, no trail, just the eerie stillness and the knowledge that whatever took this hiker or haunted the woods was still out there. I never found the hiker. Weeks later, we discovered his campsite untouched, food uneaten, belongings neatly arranged, as if he had vanished into thin air. That night, I sat by my cabin, staring at the forest edge, and I realized something. It wasn't about finding him anymore. It was about understanding that there are places in this world that are not meant for us, corners of reality that exist just out of reach, where time and logic bend, and sometimes they reach back. I'm still here, still a ranger, still walking the trails. But I never go alone anymore. I carry talismans, lights, tools, anything that gives me the slightest sense of control. And every night I check the shadows, the spaces between trees, the way the wind stirs the leaves, because I know it's there, watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, that one day I might not get lucky. One day it might decide I've lingered too long, and like the hiker before me, I'll vanish. The woods are patient. The forest remembers. And whatever it is, it doesn't forget. I can only hope, if that day comes, someone will tell my story the same way I tell it now. So you understand. So you know, there are things out there that defy logic, defy reason, and sometimes the only thing you can do is survive. And even survival is never guaranteed. And even survival is never guaranteed.